Hello, dear friends. Today is the 22nd of August, 2025 year, and this is a traditional overview of the map of hostilities. Today, a huge number of changes and news are coming from almost the entire line of contact. The main changes for today are also in the Gulye-Poli direction, in the South Donetsk direction, in the Pokrovsky direction, also in the Seversky direction. And the main news today comes from the Kupinsky direction and also from the Sumy direction, which we will talk about and look at in this video. And before we start, as you know, I would like to ask you to subscribe to the channel. With your subscription, you will greatly help the development of the channel. Thank you to everyone who subscribed. And let's start our review with the Kherson direction. More than 7 arrivals have been recorded in the Kherson direction over the past day. The arrival was recorded near the settlement of Novoboreslev, Kazatskaya. There were also arrivals in the area of Tokarevka, Ponyatovka, Nikolsky, Sadovoy, and Tonovka, and also in the area of the settlement of Belozerka. Let me remind you that arrivals here are recorded only from aviation. The aviation of the Russian army works here, the Ukrainian aviation does not work here, and the arrivals are mainly FABs, at the points of temporary deployment of the armed forces of Ukraine. In turn, the Ukrainian side stated that 6 attacks were repulsed by the Russian army in the area of the village of Dacha. The AFU positions were attacked here, and all attacks were repulsed. Let me remind you that attacks are carried out here with the help of F-drones. Just as yesterday, the positions of the Russians were attacked in the area of the settlement of Galaya Pristan on the islands, and also on the islands in the area of Novaya Kakhovka. This is where the positions of the Russian forces were attacked. Otherwise, the front line has not changed here today, as it has for the last few months. Here, along the entire line of combat contact, both Russian and Ukrainian buckets are working on the positions of the AFU, and the positions of the Bs of the Russian Federation, and artillery is also working. Let's go with you to the Orekhovsky direction. There are no major changes on the map in the Orekhovsky direction as of today, but there is news that the Ukrainian military is counterattacking the positions of the Russians in the Belogori area, and they are also attacking in the Novopokrovka area. This is the way the APU is being attacked, and Russian troops are striking at the positions of the APU in the area of Malaya Tokmachka, and also positional combat operations in the area of the typical, small Sherbakov, and Kamensky. Here, the calculations of the AFU F-drones attack the positions of the Russian armed forces in these 3 settlements. And in turn, Russian troops are attacking the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the area of Stepnogorsk, and in the Primorsky district. Otherwise, here's the news for today. Let's move on with you. Walk in the Polish direction. As you know, for 3.5 years, Russian troops have failed to take control of Gulye-Pol, although attacks have repeatedly been carried out in this direction. And today, Russian troops are developing success a little to the east, or rather northeast of Gulye-Pol. And most likely the movement will be in this way to the supply road. And naturally, this will not happen in 1 month, but most likely the war will last for more than 1 month. And as for today's advance, as you know, yesterday we talked about the fact that Russian troops have taken control of this entire territory. Also earlier, Russian troops advanced in this area of hostilities, and today we received confirming material that Russian troops have advanced a little more in the Olgovsky area, and some sources report that Olgovskoy has completely come under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and attacks are already coming from Olgovsky in the direction of the settlement of Poltava. Earlier, there was also news that Russian troops from Malinovka were moving in the direction of Poltava. But this information was never confirmed. Perhaps in the coming days additional materials will be received confirming the capture of Olgovsky, and we will see that Russian troops are moving in the direction of Poltava, and today there are changes mainly in this area of hostilities. Let's move on with you. In the area of the settlement of Timirevka, Russian troops are expanding the control zone to the west of this settlement. According to some reports, the reverse has already come under the control of the Russians. Yesterday, we talked about the fact that there are attacks to the contrary, and there are already reports that Russian troops are moving in the direction of the settlement of Berezovo. This is the direction in which the Russian military is moving and is also attacking settlements that are on the way to Berezovo. 2 localities are Ternova and Zaporizhia. And as for the new Georgievka, it really came under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. And now attacks are going on Kamishevka, and according to some pro-Russian sources, information is received that battles for Kamishevka have begun, and Russian troops have managed to gain a foothold on the outskirts of this settlement. It is not yet known on which outskirts the Russian troops have gained a foothold, either on the northern or on the southern side of Novaya Georgievka, but in the coming days we may see the results of the advance of Russian forces. Also, Russian troops are expanding the control zone to the west of the Free Field. The Free Field is located right here, and according to some reports, the armed forces of the Russian Federation are already clearing a pocket south of Shevchenko. Shevchenko is here, and now there is a sweep of this pocket. We move with you further along the map to the settlement of Malivka. Here, Russian troops are expanding the control zone in the area in the direction of the village of Seknev. Yesterday, a video was received from this point. There were advanced positions of the Russians here, and the entire territory came under the control of Russian forces. This is this area of military operations. As of today, Russian troops have expanded the control zone even more. This area of military operations has also come under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. And it was from this point that the video material was obtained. Here, the advance was up to 1 kilometer in favor of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. And it is reported that Russian troops are pressing from the side of Alexandrograd and from the side of Malivka, in the direction of the settlement of Seknev. It is not yet known whether the Russians managed to gain a foothold in this locality or not. We will find out about this in the coming days and talk about it. We move with you further along the map to the settlement of Andriivka-Klevtsova. There was information received that Andriivka-Klevtsova completely came under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine, is not controlled by the Russians, and Russian troops were pushed in the area of the settlement of Tolstoy. This is where the video material from the Ukrainian military came from. Here the Ukrainian military sets the flag of Ukraine. Thus, we can conclude that Tolstoy is now under the control of the APU. And here the advance of the Ukrainian military poses a serious danger to the grouping of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the area of the settlements of Zeleny Gay and Novokotskaya. The fact is that the Wet Yali River flows here, and thus the Ukrainian military cut off the grouping of the armed forces of the Russian Federation from supply in the area of the Green Guy, of the other Hadsky, and thereby can block the grouping of troops of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, cutting off from supply. We will see how events will develop in the near future. So far, the territory marked in yellow has come under the full control of the Ukrainian military and has been completely cleared. As for the advance of Russian forces in the area of the Filia settlement, according to reports from the Ukrainian side, there was information from pro-Russian sources yesterday. Today there is information from pro-Ukrainian sources that Russian troops have really crossed the Volchya River here and are already attacking the AFU positions in the area of the Filia settlement. In the coming days, we will also see the Russian military advancing here. No news has been received from the settlement of Moravka 4 today. Fierce fighting continues here. Let me remind you that yesterday Russian troops expanded the control zone in the Kotlyrovka area and are moving in the direction of the supply road to Moravka. In the coming days, we may also see a serious advance of the armed forces of the Russian Federation here. If the Ukrainian military does not attempt to counterattack and stabilize the line of contact, we are moving with you to the Pokrov direction. There are significant changes in the Pokrovsky direction today, or rather changes over the past day. Let's start with the world reward. There are a lot of FABs flying in the Mir reward area. Here at these points, the FABs were recorded over the past day. Let me remind you of some of the things we talked about yesterday. And let's watch one video. 2 arrivals were recorded here at the point of temporary deployment of the VISO, as well as at the control point of the WAV. It is stated that there were arrivals of 3,000 FABs. You yourself could have seen it on the video, and thus, strikes are being carried out here now with the help of FABs at the points of temporary deployment of the armed forces of Ukraine. Also at the control points of the WAV, and perhaps in the coming days, the Mir reward assault operations may begin. As for bypassing Toretsk, earlier there was information that Russian troops had taken Radinsko under their control, and were even advancing. It was at this point that the AFU positions were hit far in the rear. But nevertheless Radinskaya is mostly under the control of the AFU. Russian troops are currently not advancing in this area of hostilities. All forces are aimed at bypassing the village of Shakovaya. As you know, yesterday we talked about the fact that Russian troops are advancing in this area of hostilities and are moving in the direction of the settlement of Sofiyevka. And here, too, was the arrival of FAB at the point of temporary deployment. FAB has arrived here 3,000 times. And today, Russian troops are also moving in the direction of the settlement of Vladimirovka. According to some reports, they have already gained a foothold on the southern outskirts, and the assault actions of this settlement have begun. And also Russian troops are advancing to the east of the settlement of Kucherov Yard. This is where the news comes that Russian troops are moving in this direction, and are already attacking the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the area of the settlement of Toretskaya. So far, some of the information comes in the form of news, and in the coming days, video materials and supporting information about the expansion of the control zone in favor of one of the parties may be received here. As for the settlement of Petrovka, yesterday we talked about the fact that Russian troops have gained a foothold in this settlement. And there are already reports that Russian troops are attacking in the direction of the settlement of Maryevka. Earlier it was said that the Ukrainian military cut off the supply of groups of stormtroopers, but there were much more stormtroopers of the Russian army, and attacks are already underway on the settlements of Rubeznaya, Steps, and Volnaya. And everything suggests that Russian troops are expanding their presence in this direction, and expanding the zone of control from the flanks. And if Russian troops really advance in this area of hostilities, then Pokrovsk will actually be completely cut off from supplies, and possibly will be surrounded. We continue to observe this area of hostilities and move on. There are changes in the area of Alexandro-Shultino. For today, video material has been received from this point. Here were the advanced positions of the Russians. Here the advance was up to 1 kilometer in favor of the Russian forces. And today, this whole territory has come under the control of the Russians. Let me remind you that yesterday we talked about the fact that this area of military operations came under the control of the Russians. And earlier there was information from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation that Alexander-Shultin came under the full control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, but this information was premature. Now the western part of this settlement is still under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. Despite the fact that Russian troops are actively storming this settlement, it is possible that at the time of recording the video, the control zone here is much wider. But we make changes after receiving any supporting materials. And today there are such changes here. There are also changes in this area of hostilities. Here, Russian troops forced the Seversky-Donetsk-Donbass Canal, and at this point, there were advanced positions of the Russians. Here, the advance was up to 3.5 kilometers, and the entire territory marked in red came under the control of the Russians. And everything suggests that after the capture of Alexander-Shultin, Russian troops will level the front line in the area of Stupakik. And in the area of Alexander-Shultin, this entire pocket will come under the control of the Russians, and then, perhaps, the assault actions of the settlement of Konstantinovka will begin. As for Konstantinovka itself, aviation shells arrive here at the points of temporary deployment of the AFU. At the control points of the WAV. In the area of Novodmitrivka, there was a FAB arrival. There was also a FAB arrival in Konstantinovka itself. And in the area of the village of Barostok, there was also an air detachment arrival. Otherwise, the front line here looks like this. We are moving with you further to the Seversk direction. In the Seversky direction, Russian troops are developing success and clearing a pocket, mainly between Serebryansk and Novoselka. This is how the front line is leveled. Confirmation information has been received for today. From this area of the fighting, this area came under the control of the Russians. Also yesterday, we talked about the fact that this entire territory has come under the control of Russian forces. And perhaps at the time of recording the video here, the zone of control in favor of the Russians is much wider. But as you know, we make changes after receiving reliable information. It was also said yesterday that between the excavation and Ivan Darivka, Russian troops are leveling the front line. And information is already being received that Russian troops are leveling the front line between the excavation and Novoselka. In this way, the situation along the line of contact in this direction may change in the coming days. We are going with you to the Serebryansky forest. Let's remove the map a little. This is how the Serebryansky forest looks like. This whole plot is the Serebryansky forest, for those who do not know. Yesterday, we talked about the fact that Russian troops are clearing a pocket between Serebryansk and the Serebryansk forest itself. Yesterday, this area of operations, military operations, came under the control of the Russians. They also had news that Russian troops had taken a significant part of the Serebryansky forest under their control. And today, we received supporting materials from this area of action. Over the past 24 hours, this entire territory has come under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. And there is also information from pro-Ukrainian sources that there are blocked military APU. in the southwestern outskirts of the Serebryansk forest. Everything suggests that the Ukrainian military is blocked somewhere in this area of hostilities and cannot leave. Now the entire area is being cleaned up, and perhaps in the coming days, we will see the cleaning of the entire Luhansk region. Let me remind you that there is a small section of the Luhansk region, which was under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine, and is now being actively cleaned up, and there is also a small section of the Luhansk region in this area of hostilities, which is not controlled by the Russian army. Let's go with you to the Krasnolimansko direction. No major changes have been recorded here for today. In the area of Torsky, Russian troops are advancing towards the settlement of Zarekhnaya. Yesterday, we talked about the fact that the Russians had advanced positions at this point. There is news that Russian troops are advancing in the Zarekhny area, expanding the control zone. Perhaps we will see an expansion of the control zone in the northern part in the coming days, and also maybe in the southern part. And everything suggests that Russian troops are going to the supply road to Zarekhny. This is where the supply road passes, and it is possible that the armed forces of the Russian Federation have already taken fire control of this supply road, which leads from the western side. And also under fire control, perhaps the road from the north has fallen. And now the Ukrainian military will be blocked in Zarekhny if they do not attempt to counterattack and stabilize the line of contact. After the capture of Zarekhny, the estuary opens to the Russian troops, and if the Russian troops reach the estuary, they will be able to cut off the entire grouping of Ukrainian troops in Seversk from supply. Since the supply road runs in this way to Seversk, the southern supply road has already been completely cut off and is under both physical and fire control. We continue to monitor the situation in this area of hostilities and move on with you. In the area of Novoselovka and also in the area of Drobyshev, there were arrivals of FABs on the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine, and everything suggests that in the coming days, assault actions of these settlements may begin. In the area of Shandor-Golova, there is also a message from pro-Russian sources that Russian troops are expanding the control zone. The Ukrainian side does not recognize the advance of the Russian military. And here is a very controversial situation, since all information comes in the form of news, and each side embellishes its achievements. Therefore, there are no changes here for today, but news is coming that there is an advance of Russian forces here. Also, positional fighting continues in the area of Karpovka, Redkadub, Grikovka, Novy Mir, Olgovkin. And let's move on to the Kupinsky direction. The situation has become clearer here. Yesterday, we talked about the fact that there was a tank attack from the AFU on the positions of the Russians who were in these buildings. And today it is reported that DRU groups and Russian DRU groups have indeed been spotted here, working not only in this area of hostilities, but also in the northern part of Kupinsk. Somewhere in this area, Russian DRU groups are working in Kupinsk itself. And as of today, no serious progress has been recorded here. Opposition fighting is also underway along the entire line of contact. The positions of the armed forces of Ukraine were attacked in the area of the settlement of Moskovka, and also in the area of the settlement of Petropavlevsk. There is such news here for today. We are moving with you further along the map to the Velikoburlak direction. Attacks on the AFU positions in the area of the settlement of Kotnoy and Imbarnoy continue here. The APU is still attacking the positions of the Russians in the area of the settlement of Melivoy, and in the forests to the west of the settlement of Melivoy. The positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation were attacked in these forests. We are moving with you to the settlement of Volchansk. Fierce fighting continues here without any changes along the line of contact. Also, according to some reports, there is information that Russian troops have expanded the control zone to the west of Volchansk, in the forests that are located here in this area of hostilities. Perhaps here the Russian troops have leveled the front line a little. Let me remind you that earlier Russian troops crossed the Seversky Donetsk River and entered these forests and gained a foothold in them. Now, there may be an expansion of the control zone, but there has been no confirmation of this. The same thing happens in the Lipetsk direction. Here, the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the area of the village of Lipsy were attacked. In turn, the APU attacked the positions of the Russians in the area of the settlement of Gluboko and Lukinsy, without changing along the line of contact. And as for the Sumy direction, there have been no changes on the map in the Sumy direction for today, but information is received from pro-Ukrainian sources that the AFU has a critical situation here. Since the main combat units, more trained military have been sent to the South Donetsk direction. Now there is a transfer of reserves from this direction to the South Donetsk direction in order to stabilize the front line. And the Russian troops, in turn, have pulled up a huge number of F-drone calculations in this direction, and are actually attacking the VSO positions along the entire line of contact up to 15 kilometers deep. Here, in fact, the Ukrainian military cannot even drive up to Andriivka, Kondratovka, and Unikovka. Perhaps in the coming days, and perhaps in the coming weeks, there will be a change along the line of combat contact in favor of the Russian forces, since the main parts of the combat-ready unit have been removed from this direction and sent to the South Donetsk direction. As for Tetkin, the positions of Russians in the Tetkin settlement itself are being attacked here with the help of F-drones. And Russian troops are also attacking this entire agglomeration of settlements, also with the help of F-drones. Otherwise, here's the news for today. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you soon.